Hello and welcome to episode 30 of the Crash and Ride Podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Dave from the Dopey Podcast. Dave doesn't use his last name, so I'm not going to use his last name either. Dopey is a podcast about drugs, drug stories, and dumb shit. That's his own description. I really love the Dopey Podcast. I found out about it about 3 weeks ago, and I've binged it ever since. It's my favorite podcast right now. If this is your first episode of Crash and Ride is a long-form interview podcast where I talk to musicians about depression, anxiety, addiction, and abuse. The idea is that if we could have honest conversations around these things instead of stigmatizing them, maybe we could start to see ourselves and others and start to get better as a community. As I've said many times on this podcast, no one's going to take care of us but us. I am a musician. I'm a drummer. I play drums with the rock band 5/8 from Athens, Georgia. I also play drums with the Tokyo rock band Pinky Doodle Poodle. And I play drums in Mike Mills from REM's side project, the Mike Mills Concerto. We have a tour coming up with Chuck Leavell. Just a few dates I want to throw at you about that. We're playing Sunday, September 29th at Atlanta Symphony Hall in Atlanta, Georgia. Wednesday, October 2nd, we're playing the Lyric Theater in Birmingham, Alabama. Friday, October 4th, we're playing the Lucas Theater for the Arts in Savannah, Georgia. And Saturday, October 5th, we're playing the Miller Theater in Augusta, Georgia. Come see those shows. Tickets are available. Chuck Leavell is the keyboard player from the Rolling Stones and formerly of the Allman Brothers. Mike Mills, of course, is in REM. There's some other great musicians in that band. I talk about that some in today's interview if you want to check that out. Am I nervous about playing with a member of the Rolling Stones? Fuck yeah, I'm nervous. Wouldn't you be? But we've got lots of rehearsals between now and the first show, and I'll be fine. It's going to be a great show. In news about the podcast, Crash and Ride t-shirts will be available in 2 weeks. I'm ordering them today. The website will be finished in a few days. You'll be able to pre-order t-shirts off the website. You'll get a good look at the design. They'll say loud guitars save lives, and they'll have the new logo, which only like 5 people have seen. Our thanks to Scott Sosby, our graphic design guy from New York City. He's outstanding at his work. He's a freelance guy. If you need any kind of design work done, you should find Sosby Designs on the web. He's also a great drummer from whom I have stolen so many parts that it's almost like a Scott Sosby tribute drummer sometimes. So he's really, really talented. Thanks, Scott. I know I promised last week that Crash and Ride coffee mugs are just around the corner, but I got a shipping quote on 144 coffee mugs, and holy cow, man. I guess coffee mugs are really heavy. 144 is a lot of them. This is going to be a lot of money. I got to figure this one out, but I'll get back to you on that. Just give me a little time on the mugs. Expect t-shirts any day. Crash and Ride is brought to you in part by Greer Amplification. Greer Amps builds the best boutique effects pedals available. If you're looking for an overdrive, boost, fuzz, compressor, or tremolo that is rugged, road-tested, and at home on stage, in the studio, or in your living room, Greer has a pedal for you. Nick and his staff strive to build the best products around with the best tone you've ever heard. They believe in their products, and they stand behind them too, backing each one up with a lifetime warranty to the original owner. Each Greer Amps product is hand-built in Athens, Georgia, USA. Go to www.greeramps.com or visit your favorite music retailer today. Crash and Ride is also brought to you in part by Jittery Joe's, a local coffee roaster from Athens, Georgia. They have a special espresso blend named after the podcast. It's called Crash and Ride. It's available from their web store or in their retail locations in cans, or you can get it in drinks at Hendershots Coffee. Hendershots is a musician-owned and operated coffee shop just steps away from the UGA campus in Athens, Georgia. It's owned by a guy called Seth. Seth is a fantastic drummer, a fantastic guy, and I promise you, any money you give him is not going to go to a spoiler campaign to crush Medicare for all, unlike other coffee shops you might frequent. Later this fall, it's looking increasingly like it'll be the 3rd or 4th week of October, I'm going to do a live episode of Crash and Ride at Hendershots, where I'm going to interview Bob Sleppy, the director of Nucci Space. Nucci Space is a mental health resource for musicians here in Athens, Georgia. It's a nonprofit where you can walk in and tell them you're in crisis, and they'll refer you to a mental health professional, and they'll subsidize your care. I don't know how many Athens musicians have availed themselves of this resource, but I know it's saved several lives, including my own, including some of the people nearest and dearest and closest to me. So I'm very grateful for Nucci Space. Nucci Space is an unvarnished good thing in the Athens music scene. They run the Boys and Girls Rock Camp every summer. They have an ongoing used gear garage sale where you can get gear really cheap that's been refurbished and fixed up by the people who work there. They have a recording studio where they teach young people to be recording engineers, but most importantly, they provide this incredible healthcare resource for people in crisis. You know, not just mental health care, but also sometimes they have dentists come in and they do a dental day. They do hearing tests and provide subsidized, like, hearing protection for people who are in, really loud bands, like every band I've ever been in. You should support Nucci Space, even if it's by just booking time in their incredibly affordable rehearsal studios that they have here at their location in Athens, Georgia, or just go to the used gear garage sale and buy some equipment. They've got really cool stuff that has been like picked over by some of the best technicians in Athens and made perfect. Or if you're someone who's fortunate enough to have some tax liability you need to offset, you can make a tax-deductible donation because they are a 501c3. You can call Nucci Space at 706-227-1515 or visit their website at nuci.org. That's nucci.org. Nucci Space is a really, really good thing. Speaking of nonprofits that I wholeheartedly support, if you're contemplating self-harm, if you're having a struggle with dark thoughts, if you need to talk to somebody about your anxiety and depression, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. They're 24/7, they're confidential, they're free. They have trained volunteers to help you through your crisis. 1-800-273-8255 or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. If you're a trans person struggling with anxiety, depression, or gender dysphoria, you need to talk to a peer, you can call the Trans Lifeline's peer support line at 1-877-565-8860 or go to translifeline.org. All right, today's guest, Dave from the Dopey Podcast. I discovered Dopey when a mutual follower of both of our podcasts on Twitter tagged us both. Like, you guys should hook up. I started listening to the Dopey Podcast, and I was just like, man, I love this podcast. It was a shock to me because I started at episode 1 and started working my way forward, and then someone intimated to me that the co-host Chris had died of an overdose, and I sort of fast-forwarded and found that episode and listened to the This American Life episode about it, and it just crushed me. It was really tough because I had formed this genuine affection for these two guys talking about just the insane shit they did when they were out there using, and we talk about that some in the interview. Like, Chris was not the guy I expected to overdose. Not that I expected Dave to, but Chris would have been the last guy, and it was heavy. I really love this guy, Dave. Like, there's something about the way he is in the world, his level of honesty and intimacy, and this, like, he's such an ethical guy. Like, for a junkie, he seems to be really, really grounded and like, this is fair, that is not, and I just love that about him. Also, I really love the way that he loves New York City. I love New York City. Living there would be tough for me because I'm not really cut out for living in urban environments. I've tried that and failed at least twice. But, you know, he grew up there. He's a fourth generation, like, New Yorker, and he works at Cat's Deli, which is the most New York thing I could possibly imagine. I love this guy. I'm so glad he came to talk to us. I think it's a really good episode. So let's jump into our interview with Dave from Dopey. All right, I'm here with Dave from the Dopey Podcast, probably my favorite podcast in the world, a podcast about drugs, drug stories, and dumb shit, in his own words. Hi, Dave.
Hey, man. How you doing, Patrick?
I'm great. This is the earliest I've ever spoken to anyone for the podcast. We, as you're listening to this, Dave and I are both up at, I guess it's around 7:45 Eastern time. Pretty wild.
Dude, is Dopey really your favorite podcast? Is that true?
Man, it's hit such a chord with me. Because, people who listen to this podcast know that I'm part of the secret society that keeps me off drugs. And I feel like a lot of times, you know, you go into meetings, and I've been going for a long time. I got 20 years now. And people are always like, drugs are bad, they're terrible. And I've always sat in those meetings and thought, that wasn't my experience. It's what I did using drugs. It was terrible. The drugs are pretty great. And so to hear people talk honestly just about the mayhem and those brief moments of euphoria followed by days, weeks, months of just like abject ramifications of your actions, it to me, that's a very honest program, you know?
Yeah. I loved getting high. I loved doing drugs. My life just could not sustain them. You know, It was just, I had years of misery, you know. Days of misery would have been great. I had years and years of misery, and but I often will also sit in a meeting and be like, you know, I love being sober, but I also really loved getting high. You know, just to be truthful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honesty is at the core of my recovery. If I don't tell the truth about what it was like, then I'm likely to slip into a kind of nostalgia for the chaos and the frenetic activity around drug use. And so Dopey keeps me sober, man. I mean, how could I not love a podcast that does that?
Nice. I appreciate that a lot.
Also, a mutual follower. The way that I found your podcast was a mutual follower tagged me on Twitter, and you was like, "You guys should link up." And I started at episode 1 because that's kind of how I like to do it. And I didn't know the history. I hadn't heard of This American Life, and then I was listening, and I was talking to a friend, and he sort of intimated about the death of Todd and Chris, and I sort of fast forwarded, and it just wrecked me for an entire day. It was just like, oh, this is so bad. I'm so sad right now.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, that's like, I think one of the, it's one of the magical things about podcasts, and one of the crazy things about them is it's like, it was our life. And even though we were drug addicts and stuff, and even though Todd was using, I just was naive to his life. I just thought he wouldn't die. And Chris, I didn't even know he was using. So it was just like crazy, And I think as a piece of art, I mean, if you can call a podcast a piece of art, it's compelling that these two people died while we made this piece of art. If you think about it as life and your friends, and they were my friends, it just gives me the chills every time somebody that I know never met them talks about their death. It's just like, it's crazy, it's crazy.
One of the things I love about the early Dopey episodes is that you're 4 or 5 months sober and you're not really settled in.
Yeah, I know.
There's a little bit of like irreverence and when I first heard that, I was like, oh man, this guy's not going to make it. And then surprised, the guy with the most sort of orthodox kind of take on the program is the guy who goes back out, which I was just like, you just never know. It's that whole cunning, baffling, and powerful thing is it's real.
Well, the crazy thing I think is, I had been around recovery before we had started. I had tried it so many times that like I just hated to pretend as though it was going to work this time because it failed every other time. So like that was my take. I really needed it, and I wanted it, but I needed it. And I think Chris, I think he was really, really smart, really obviously hysterically funny, incredibly likable. He just had this way of being able to regurgitate facts and knowledge, and he had spent probably half of his life institutionalized in different programs. Rehabs, jails, outpatients, inpatients, you name it. So like he was able to offer like every bit of, like you said, orthodox recovery. Yeah. But I think, in the deep down, he was just, doing his best. I think it was great for the show though, that he was such a textbook, book thumper kind of guy, or was capable of regurgitating it. It provided a shitload of information, which I thought was great.
Yeah, I think maybe part of, and it's maybe irresponsible to go back and try to Monday morning quarterback what happened to Chris, but his family cleared so many obstacles out of his way in his life that sometimes I feel like he was creating his own conflict just so he had problems to solve.
Yeah. I mean, I think that could be really said for Todd. With Todd, it was like, and he was using, and they still did everything for him while he was using. With Chris, I think they were so happy that he had the time that he had acquired, and they were very affluent people, and they were like, well, he has this much time. He had been working, in restaurants and kitchens and, wellness retreats and sober houses. And now he wants to get his doctorate. And they were like, well, why can't we give him an apartment and pay for his doctorate? Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's like if they hadn't, who knows? I mean, I think lessons learned or better learned or whatever. I know my dad, like whenever things got sticky for me, my dad helped me out. Like if I couldn't, like he paid for my last treatment, and he paid, I remember I had just gotten sober. I think I had $10,000 in the bank, a year in or something, and some old debt creeped up on me that I didn't know about. And they just took the $10,000 out of the bank.
Oh my God.
Okay. So I had nothing. And I freaked out and I got scared and I called my father. And I'm just to be totally honest, he gave me $10,000 because he knew how, you know what I mean? And like, so I don't know, you know what I mean? Monday morning quarterbacking kind of stuff. It's like, it's just, it's like you move right and you live and you move left and you die. Right.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, and I think that I come from a middle-class Jewish background, and my parents were both teachers, but they held me out of a million things. I mean, obviously I pay for my life. I pay for my children. I pay for our house and the food and everything. But if I'm in trouble, he helps me out, just to be totally honest.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Manhattan.
Wow.
I'm actually in the house that I often record in my father's apartment, and I'm there right now. I grew up on 27th and 8th Avenue in Manhattan.
And so one of the sort of great conflicts in my life is that I'm raising my kid in a rural school district in Northeast Georgia. And on one hand, like the school she goes to is really great, but we have to get on an airplane to go to MoMA or to see ballet or to go to Broadway. And
right.
My wife and I are both artists. I'm a musician and she's an actor. And sometimes we sort of look at each other and like, man, we feel like our kid's getting a great basic education to sort of enter the great, like, capitalist meat grinder. But like, is she getting any exposure to culture outside of what comes over YouTube or Netflix,
But you're in Athens? Where are you at?
We're outside of Athens, Georgia. Yeah.
But I mean, I've been down there, and it's like the art scene is booming.
Yeah.
And you guys are artists. I mean, I'm sure your kid is going to be exposed to more stuff than most kids in Manhattan. I was growing up. I got exposed to a ton of shit just because of the school that I went to. I went to a really good school, and it was very progressive, and I was around a bunch of stuff. But I grew up in super middle class, just, watching TV on the couch kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm sure your kid is going to grow up a billion times more artistic than I did, being in the most metropolitan center in the universe,
Yeah, your folks, did they grow up in New York?
Yeah, my dad grew up in Queens. I mean, he grew up on the Lower East Side, moved to Queens when he was like 5. My mom grew up in Washington Heights and moved to Chelsea in her 20s, I think.
Man.
Yeah, they're both. I'm like 4th generation New York City, basically. New York City Jew.
I have a friend, Jody. She lives in Queens, and she's never lived anywhere but New York City. And every now and then she gets a little exasperated or exhausted by the city because it'll do that,
That's funny because I just moved to the suburbs, right?
Yeah.
And the town that I live in is this is my favorite joke. It's like it's so white you can't find dark chocolate at 7-Eleven. You know what I'm saying? Like fucking. Like I'm like one of the 15 Jews in the town. It's all Italian, Irish, blue collar, kind of contractor, plumber, cop land.
Yeah.
But as long as I'm working in Manhattan, it's like it's a good balance. I don't mind it. It's all right.
Yeah. Now, it's funny. I've been going to the city since the 90s, and it's changed so much. It used to be that, we'd play brownies over there by the park, and they'd tell us, don't cross the park because then you're in Alphabet City. And, the A, B, C, D, if you're on Avenue A, you'll be all right. If you're on Avenue B, I can't remember what it was now. Avenue C.
It's bad.
Avenue B is bad. Avenue C, you should be careful.
Avenue C, you get Coke.
Yeah,
and Coke and Avenue C.
And Avenue D, you're dead. And I was there a few years ago, and I got turned around. I don't know the city like the back of my hand, like some people, and like I was like, where the fuck am I? And I realized that I was standing on Avenue D, and there were 2 guys like 10 feet away wearing loafers with no socks talking about various brands of golf clubs. And I was like, what the fuck has happened to Manhattan? It's changed so much.
Yeah. I mean, Avenue D, I work on the Lower East Side for the most part. And Avenue D is pretty much as close as it gets to old New York, because there's a housing project and there's a lot of very inexpensive places there, and there's a lot of crime. But you will find guys with no socks talking about golf clubs as well. It's funny, like how everybody, the city is so much safer and more populated, and you can get yourself, a gluten-free salad with all sorts of stuff at every block. But it's lost some of its charm and a lot of its character. I don't know. It's like New York is still New York. For me, I work in one of the oldest delis in the world, and it's run by Dominican guys for the most part.
Yeah.
And for me, those guys are like old New York. So I still get a good helping of old New York on a daily basis.
What deli?
Katz's.
I love Katz. Every time I go to the city,
Yeah.
I go there, and people are like, it's touristy, man. Why are you going to Katz? You should go to 2nd Avenue Deli. I'm like, I just love Katz. I love the feel, the sort of pre-World War II feel of that room, and I love the signs, send a salami to your boy in the Army, which doesn't rhyme if you're Southern, but apparently does if you're from New York.
Yeah.
There's a feel to Katz that there's one guy, I can't remember his name now, but Jody, my friend from Queens, was like, that's the guy. It's a really good cut of pastrami. So we always like kind of lie in the weeds until his station is open and slip up there and get a pastrami on rye with brown mustard and nothing else.
Totally, man. I mean, it's a time machine. It's definitely, it's like it is a time machine to old New York. They haven't changed anything except for the prices and the size of the sandwiches. But it's fucking, you cannot go there without feeling like you're in another dimension. It's a miraculous place, and the food is still the same too. And I don't like doing commercials for Katz's, but I do love that phenomenon. And I actually had moved back. I lived in Los Angeles for years,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother was dying of leukemia. And, I was on methadone in Los Angeles, and my mother was dying of leukemia, and I wanted to come home before she died because I didn't think I could live with that, that reality.
Yeah.
And I had a cousin who actually owned half of Katz's, and I worked at Katz's when I was a kid, when I was in high school.
Oh my God.
So, I called my cousin and I said, can I come back? Because I need to make some money if I come back to New York. And it took me months and months and months to get off methadone. And I moved back to Manhattan, and I got back to Katz's, and I was like, oh, Jesus. The second I got there, I was like, I got to get out of here. And I remember I was working on the back counter at Katz's with this Jamaican guy. And the Jamaican guy was like, boy, you're not going to believe how busy it is at Christmas. And this was in September. And I was like, dude, I'm not going to be here in Christmas. There's no fucking way. And now it's like 11 years later, and I'm still there. So it's one of those things.
So, so you had this fairly middle-class childhood living in Manhattan. And do you recall, like, at the point at which your life kind of turned to drugs?
Yeah, I do. I definitely do. I remember the first time I drank, I want to say I was 15, and I was a waiter at a summer camp. It was the worst summer of my life. I had no friends, and I felt very much alone, and it was the end of the summer. And I was kind of friends with the European kitchen staff, and I wound up going to a party over there, and I drank, I want to say 20 screwdrivers, and I totally blacked out, like completely. And I threw up all night, and the next day I was sick, and I was like, I don't want to drink again. And I didn't drink for a long time. And every time I drank, I felt it did something to me besides the addiction that a lot of alcoholics have. Right. It like actually made me feel sick. I think I have an actual allergy to alcohol, which is funny. My mother had an allergy to alcohol too. But I remember when I smoked weed, I was like, I like this, Yeah. And it wasn't a big deal. I was in the same school from when I was 4 till I was 17, and I had the same friends, and I didn't need to become a drug addict. You know what I mean? Like I felt very comfortable, but when I went away to school, I felt very lonely, and I felt very nervous, and I felt very insecure, and I had all of those kind of hallmark alcoholic feelings of not being comfortable in my skin. Yeah. The second I left this warm haven that I had, and I got to school, and I made a friend in school, and we were in a cultural anthropology class, and he had a ton of weed. And I was like, let's smoke weed before the test, because that's what college kids are supposed to do. And he was like, okay. And from then on, I don't think I didn't smoke weed until I was like 41. He was in the band. We were in it every day. I mean, the second I started smoking weed in college, I knew that it was for me, you know.
Yeah.
And from there, it just, you know, I was obsessed with rock and roll, and you know, those stories of San Francisco and the beatniks, and you know, the drug culture and the counterculture, and I just loved all of that stuff. And I figured the only way that I could really have the life that I wanted was to kind of go down those paths without realizing how destructive those paths could be. So that's what happened. That's where it started for me.
They don't ever tell you the rest of those stories. Like, Keith Moon drove his car into a pool, and everyone's like, hell yeah, rock and roll excess is cool. And I'm thinking, I bet he was still making payments on that car after it was, you know, long after it was like reconciled to the junkyard, you know.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think I heard though the end of a million of those stories, and I still did not think that could. I didn't understand what it meant.
Yeah.
You know, you could hear miserable stories without understanding what real misery is, I think.
Yeah, no, that I definitely agree with that. Where did you go to college?
I went to college in upstate New York, in Ithaca, and I played in a soul band up there.
Oh.
A 14-piece soul band, like that was kind of like trying to be the Blues Brothers or Otis Redding or something like that. And we had like a big horn set. And in high school, I had played in ska bands around Manhattan.
What do you play?
That was my thing. I played harmonica, and I was really into it. And I was like, you know, I mean, you're a real musician, so you probably know this and broke through it. I was in that, you know, like, I could have been great. I was in that little place where if you keep going, you're going to be great, or if you stay on the other side, you're going to be good. And I stayed on the other side. I never broke into the great place. But I was in a band that had a tiny deal, and in college I played in this soul band, and then it kind of turned into some weird, like, psychedelic rat band, funk band, and then like
that was the 90s.
That was the 90s.
Yeah, the 90s.
I just had a dream of being a musician, but I didn't have the confidence. You know, I'm a songwriter, I'm a guitar player, I'm a harmonica player, I sing relatively badly, but if I had confidence, I think it could have worked out for me musically, you know?
I mean, I'm enjoying, like, the most success I've ever experienced as a musician right now, and I'm well in the middle age at this point, so it's not too late to, like, rededicate yourself. But I think that you have to define success in terms that are, like, compatible with like the law of gravity. Like, even at this late date, like, well, especially at this time in, like, the sort of music industry at large, you're not going to experience the kind of, like, blockbuster success that the sort of unified media was capable of producing in the 90s and before, but you can define a success that you get to play as often as you want, and you get to play music that you love, and, you know, that's a kind of success. And you still play. You're going to do this thing at the Hope in the Hills festival coming up in September, right?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be well, the thing is, I play very rarely. I had when I was a kid, my dream, and this is going to sound retarded, but my first dream when I was a kid was to kind of be a talk show host. Like, I loved Regis Philbin. I loved, there was a guy on the radio when I was a kid called John Gambling. And then I really got into Howard Stern. But I always wanted to be a talk show host. And I mean, in my head, I wanted to be John Lennon, and I wanted to be Bob Dylan, and I wanted to play in the Grateful Dead, and I wanted to do that stuff. But in my heart, I knew I could never do that stuff. But being a talk show host seemed like something that I actually had enough skill to do for whatever reason. I don't know. It just sort of happened that way.
Yeah.
And now I actually do it. Obviously, I'm not setting the world on fire with my little podcast, but I really enjoy it, and it doesn't really take me too far away from my family.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like playing out, like I'm not good at night. Like I was asleep at 8:40 last night. You know, I'm not a night person. I'm a morning person.
Yeah.
You know, and I can't, maybe one, I mean, I'm thinking I'm going to make a couple, people love, I have a couple songs that I put on Dopey, and people love the songs, and I love that they love it. And I have a dude who wants us to do Dopey records and put out some songs, and I've always wanted to do that. So I think we'll try to do that.
Yeah.
The Hope in the Hills thing is they're going to have me MC this kind of addiction recovery festival in West Virginia, which is so cool, you know. The guy, what's his name? Tyler Childers is headlining.
Yeah.
The big lineup in Appalachia, and I think John Prine is one of the sponsors. It's pretty cool. I'm very, very honored and excited to go. Never done anything like that.
That's September 28th, right?
Yeah.
I'm right in the middle of rehearsals for this next run of dates with Mike Mills and Chuck Leavell, so I'm not going to be able to. I mean, the first I heard about that, I was like, I got to go to this. This number one, I'm Appalachian. I grew up in the most northern part of North Carolina you can be without being in Virginia, and it's not that far from the West Virginia line, so it's particularly appealing to me. But two, like, I discovered your podcast, fell in love with it, heard you were going to MC this thing, and I was like, well, this is a golden opportunity to go check it all out. But then I'm down in Macon rehearsing just a few blocks from the house where all those Allman Brothers records were written. So
that's so cool. I mean, I think you're in a pretty amazing spot, you know. Mike Mills and Chuck Leavell, it's like, I can't even imagine those guys in the same universe, let alone in the same band, which is like just such a cool idea.
It's funny how their universes kind of cross-pollinate, though. Like, they're not that far apart in age because, you know, Chuck was only 20 when he joined the Allman Brothers, and so he was much younger than the other guys in the band, and they're all from central Georgia, if not Macon, than one of the towns nearby, so they all kind of share a common cultural heritage, and they all just love music. Although I got to tell you, learning Allman Brothers songs is no picnic, man. Those guys were actually kind of a jazz band, you know.
I know. It's crazy. Just all the harmonics and the harmonies and the it's crazy. Like that. I read a bunch of books about the Allman Brothers, and I remember when Chuck joined the band, and it was just, I just love the history of that band, and I love that feeling that they have with their music.
Well, I mean, I wish you could see these shows. There's going to be more shows. This is just a sort of, the first run of dates is just kind of to a proof of concept thing. We're going to make sure that this will fly, and then they're going to book a longer tour in the spring. So maybe we'll get to.
Is it just the three of you guys?
No, it's Chuck Leavell, Mike Mills, and then one of the world's premier concert violinists, a guy named Robert McDuffie, and then an orchestra that's going to provide strings for everything. And then there's some other rock guys. There's a guy named William Tonks, who's one of the greatest guitar players I've ever worked with. He's just one of those sort of behind-the-scenes guys who's played forever and done a ton of session work. And then John Neff, who was the pedal steel player and auxiliary guitar player for the Drive-By Truckers, and he's also a ridiculously talented guitar player. And then I'm behind the kit. So Mike moves from bass to guitar to piano, back to bass. Like, he kind of is all over the stage during the show. So it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of, like, I think that all of the rock guys on stage are thinking, I am the least talented person here. This is a little intimidating.
Right.
But,
right.
You know,
it's gotta be.
It's learning Jessica has been a really interesting challenge, and that's when you realize that when I say the Allman Brothers were a jazz band, like, Jessica is a song that has a head and long improvisational passages, and it comes back to the head, and it's just like something off Kind of Blue in its structure, and so it's kind of a challenge to. It has some crazy time changes too, and but it's a the feeling
of that song, though. It's like magic, just like on Kind of Blue. It's funny that you can compare the two, because both of them are just so magical. Like, forget structure-wise. Like, I didn't read it. I read it the first time, the Miles Davis autobiography. Mm-hmm. This time I listened to it, and I'm a huge Miles Davis fan. In a Silent Way is probably my favorite record ever.
Man.
But Kind of Blue is probably the most perfect record ever recorded. And then, but Jessica is one of the most perfect tunes ever recorded because it gives you that same sort of traveling feeling, like just perfect. I don't know. There's just something about it.
Well, Dwayne was a big Miles fan, and Kinda Blue was his favorite record. It's not an accident that I referenced Kinda Blue when I was talking about it, because there's a lot of harmonic stuff on that record that Dwayne was referencing through the course of his sort of musical career, as tragically short as it was. But I want to sort of talk a little bit more about, like, so you're in this band, upstate New York, and is that where IV drugs and powder drugs come into your life, or is it at some later point?
No. I upstate, I was just tripping a lot. I was just tripping and smoking a ton of weed. Then I actually got kicked out of school for weed. Like our pot dealer got busted with pounds and pounds. So he was selling all of his extra pounds, and me and my friends bought one of his extra pounds, and we got busted, a friend of mine and I, the last day of school, and we were bringing ounces to a buddy, and we got busted the last day of school. I think I had written the same paper 3 times because my computer broke. It was crazy day. And it was like, I think it was 1994 or 95. It was 94, and the Knicks were like just about to be in the NBA Finals, and we were driving to watch the Knicks game, and we got busted. And so I had to transfer schools.
You got arrested?
Yeah, I got arrested, and I got suspended from college. So I wound up transferring schools so I could transfer without my parents ever finding out that I got arrested. And it worked. I transferred to state school in Westchester, an art school called Purchase. And so I got out of that whole drug situation kind of unobstructed, but my weed smoking continued. And in art school is where I found heroin for the first time. Still didn't really catch on with me. I was still just a stoner, and I would take whatever psychedelics, and I would snort a little bit of coke, and if somebody had pills, I would take them, but I was just a fucking total stoner. But then when I got out of school, I wound up getting a job in a TV production company, and I kind of finessed it into this job where I was the host of a music magazine show where I would be interviewing rock stars and kind of crafting a show. And I got a great salary. I got a contract. And at the same time, I had a drug service that would deliver me and my friends coke. And I was away shooting a talk show in Michigan. And I came home, and everybody from the art school was at my apartment to cop coke off the delivery guy. And I walked in, and there were like 20 kids in my apartment, and the delivery guy was making all this money. And I was like, dude, what are you going to give me for making you all this money? And I remember it like it was yesterday. He took out 2 bags of heroin, and he dropped them on my coffee table. I could still see it kind of like in slow motion, the bags falling to the table. And me and my friend, it was Todd. Me and my friend Todd snorted the dope. And the next morning, I knew that it was a feeling that I never wanted to not feel, but I was scared because I couldn't afford it. But once I had finessed my career into kind of like a lucrative one, I thought I could afford to be a junkie. Like in my head, I thought I was like Miles Davis or John Lennon because I was an idiot. And even Miles Davis and John Lennon couldn't handle heroin. But in my head, I didn't really consider that aspect. I figured I would get out of it when I had to. And I produced this music magazine show in Manhattan, and I interviewed a ton of rock stars and rap stars and jazz people and whoever, and I did it all on heroin. And that's when I became a heroin addict. It was then.
Man, it sounds like the music magazine was kind of a culmination of your 2 dreams, right? You're going to mix music and being a talk show host.
Yeah, it was. And I really felt like it was the total I have arrived. This is everything I've ever wanted. And I was nervous. I was nervous and I was insecure. And the heroin, it gave me this feeling of safety, and it gave me this feeling of peace, and it made me feel brave, and it made me be who I wanted to be. when in actuality, I was a monster and I was a mess and I was a dick. You know, I was such an asshole on that drug. But I thought I kind of had to be, you know, I was a kid. I was an idiot. And from there, I wound up losing the job and like not working again until I got to Katz's, basically.
I think it's important to contextualize for people who weren't part of the music industry in the 90s, the whole I was a monster, I was an asshole, I was a dick. That was sort of the behavior standard that we were presented with of people who like worked in the music industry versus those of us who were trying to break into a career in the arts. Like everybody at every label, except the guy who was sort of finessing you into the fold, the A&R guy, were kind of dicks.
Right.
So at SUNY Purchase, did you start off injecting? When did, like, you know, my first experiences with
No. Yeah, I didn't inject it until like my third time in detox.
Oh wow.
You know, I didn't want to. I never wanted to inject heroin. You know, although I do remember as a kid seeing like movies with people injecting heroin, and it gave me this crazy feeling as a kid just to see it. But I never thought I would be injecting it. It wasn't until like my third detox that some dude was like, "You're an idiot for snorting it if you don't have any money," and then you know, injecting it was such a powerful effect. You know, that I fell into it.
So you have a few years in Manhattan as a drug addict, and you start hitting. How long between SUNY Purchase and your first rehab?
Let's see. I graduated SUNY Purchase in '96. I did a ton of detoxes before I did a rehab.
Oh wow.
My first, you know, I did my thing was public detox. Mm-hmm. Because I was poor and I didn't want my parents to know.
Yeah.
So like I did countless public detoxes in Manhattan, like every one. And I did countless public detoxes in Los Angeles. My first rehab, I did a 28-day program in a place called Rhinebeck, New York. And I want to say 2000. And I think that's when I started shooting up right after that.
I tell people all the time that, like, I don't know if you could make a worse commercial for IV drugs or any kind of opiate than the fact that people have like 1 or 2 years of use and then they spend roughly 70% of their opiate career just trying to kick. Like, how do you talk someone into doing something that they spend like 3/4 of their time once they've done it trying to stop doing it?
It's like it's you don't know that.
No,
you know
don't.
What I mean? Like,
yeah.
You have no idea. I remember in the early days of me using and me snorting dope with Todd. Todd lived in my apartment on 24th Street. He lived on the floor, and I slept in a bed. I had a mattress for him on the floor. He was delivering weed while I was kind of production assisting and producing for this tiny TV station. And he would deliver weed, and he would buy coke from doormen, and he'd buy dope from doormen, and I would be like, dude, we can only do it once a week. We're gonna get addicted, and we're gonna be fucked. And I said that for like a year, and he would kind of just like do a little more than I would until he had a little bit of a habit, a little more of a habit than I did. Yeah. And he was like, I got to get out of here. And he moved to Los Angeles. And it wasn't until I was making much more money that I was like, I can afford a habit. And then I never looked back. I was like, I want to have a habit. I like being high. I don't like not being high. I don't like getting sick, so I'm going to stay high. That was how I lived for as long as I could.
Yeah. So what took you out to Los Angeles?
Well, it was 2001, 9/11 had just happened, and I couldn't stop doing drugs. I couldn't stop shooting dope and buying pills, and it was getting very sad. And I lived in public housing, and my parents were paying my rent, and I was like, I couldn't get better. And I was in an intensive outpatient program, and my parents, the outpatient program, I kept testing positive, for heroin, and they were like to my parents, he's got to go to treatment, and a treatment center in Delray Beach, Florida, said that they would offer me a scholarship because I was such a good drug addict. They would offer me a scholarship, and pay for half of the cost. And so my dad was like, well, that makes sense. So I packed up all my shit and I went to Florida. And I think a couple months in, my counselor in Florida told my parents they had to stop paying rent on my apartment in Manhattan. And I had an apartment in Chelsea that was $300 a month.
Oh, man.
But my which is like, it's like the lottery basically.
Yeah.
But they told my parents to give it up, and I think that was probably the right thing, even though it like haunted me for 20 years. We gave it up, and when they gave it up, I was in Delray Beach. I knew I couldn't afford to live in New York and not, because rent was, 5 times what I was paying.
Yeah.
And Todd and my friend Jeremy were in Los Angeles, and I wanted to keep working in television production, so I moved to LA after I'd finished a year in treatment.
How much time was there between leaving Delray Beach in treatment and getting back into drugs?
I got into drugs in Delray. I was living in a halfway house, and I just wanted to smoke pot. Like I really loved being a stoner, and I didn't want to give up being a stoner.
Yeah.
And I was in 7-Eleven, and there was some like deadhead in front of me, and I was like, where can I get some nuggets? And he was like, I have some. So I just smoked pot in the halfway house, and I moved to LA thinking I would just smoke weed. But what I didn't know is that Todd had started smoking crystal meth. So when I got there, Todd had just basically developed a crystal meth habit. So I was like, I wasn't going to not try crystal meth. You know what I mean? What kind of drug addict doesn't try crystal meth? So, and I also knew that if I had an upper in my system, that I would need dope. And I'm so naturally up, like it's like I'm such a naturally up person, like just up and neurotic and anxious that like I needed an excuse to get the downer, and crystal was easily the best excuse you could ever have to find downers. I smoked crystal probably for a month before I insisted that me and Todd drive to Mexico to buy a ton of pills. And then after that, I got a job on a TV show in LA, and we were shooting downtown, and some homeless guy comes up to me. I was smoking cigarettes, and he's like, let me get a cigarette. And I was like, I'll give you 2 if you tell me where to get dope. And he's like, yeah, across the street. It was like they were selling dope everywhere then. Right. So he was like, yeah, here's thanks. He's like across the street, and I bought dope, and that was it. And like I lost my job like almost immediately. I had my girlfriend move out to LA, and she like literally took care of me for like, I want to say 7 years. I was like a cat in her.
A giant cat.
It was by the handful and smoking pot. It was the most unproductive period I ever had.
Yeah. Episode 15 of my podcast, I talked to a singer-songwriter from Nashville named Boo Ray. And Boo made a conscious decision to get onto dope, to get off of alcohol so he could function when he was in Los Angeles.
Wow.
The productivity expectation of musicians and other artists, you have this like window of time where you have to be good at what you do. And then the rest of the day, you're mostly just sitting around or driving in a van. And with alcohol, he would have this cumulative effect of drinking all day, and he wouldn't be able to play. But then showtime came when he was on dope, and he was just, high.
I was incredibly productive on dope the first run, but I'd say after 16, 17 months, I was totally useless.
Yeah.
I think that's all I was good for on opiates, like 16, 17 months.
And then you got on methadone out in LA.
Yeah.
And then
I had been on methadone in New York too. I didn't stay on it, but I stayed on it in Los Angeles because I didn't make enough money to, I was too scared of getting sick. I was going to withdrawal,
Yeah. But then your mom got sick.
Yeah, years later. I mean, I was in LA for 7 years. My mom got sick, I want to say, 7 years into me being in Los Angeles. It got serious. I think she had detected the leukemia maybe 10 months before she told me about it. And I knew my life was going nowhere, I knew that my life was, you know, it was like, also in Los Angeles, there are no seasons. So you don't even feel time passing. It's just a wasteland for me. It was a wasteland for me. And when my mother told me she got sick, it was like the first moment in a long time that I knew I had to do something.
Yeah.
So I started detoxing. I started, you know, weaning off the methadone, which took a long time. And then me and my girlfriend, I was too scared to move to New York. So we moved to Burlington, Vermont, because my folks have a place between New York and Vermont, and I would see my mom over the summer. And she told me she thought she was about to die, and she was, but I had just gotten clean, so it was like this miracle that I could be there and be with her, because I was like such a terrible son for so long.
Yeah.
That I had the opportunity to be there then was a total miracle.
Man, it's great that you were able to kind of be present. My mom passed in 2015, and
sorry.
Yeah, you know, we had a very complicated relationship. So
yeah,
yeah, but so you're in Burlington for a few years, and somehow make your way back to Manhattan and work at Cats.
I was only in Burlington for a summer.
Yeah,
I couldn't handle it. I could not handle Burlington. We didn't have a car. I couldn't handle being clean and staying home. Like I just needed action. Mm-hmm. And my girlfriend and I had been together for 7 years, of which I like ruined her life. And I was like, I gotta go. You know, we broke up because I was so sick, and things had to change.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it was just too much of the same thing. And I called my cousin and I asked him if I could get a job at Cats, and he said yes. And my mom was like, me and my mom had a little bit of a complicated relationship too. She was like, you can come home, but you can't live with us, you know? So I wound up living in my friend's mother's apartment, who is kind of like a borderline hoarder on the Upper West Side. And I lived up there, and I worked at Katz's, and, you know, and I still smoked weed every day and took pills. You know, my recovery story was not an easy one, and it was not a fast one. You know, I was 34 when I came back, and it took me forever to get off still,
yeah.
You know.
It's interesting. I think people underestimate the amount of anxiety that gets tied up in just being bored. Like, you had this period of time, that one brief summer in Burlington, where what you're describing to me, like, it was too much of the same thing. You were clean, but like, being bored is, for a lot of people, it's just kind of a sleepy thing where you're like, I don't have anything to do, and you get a little like morose. But like, if you have anxiety and there's nothing filling your day, then the hamster wheel inside your head like starts to go at light speed.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was. It's the perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, sometimes, like, listening to your podcast, you've had some descriptions of, there was the photographer guy that was a junkie that you were friends with, and how much time you guys would spend wandering Manhattan looking for dope. People, I think, underestimate the misery of boredom of an addict, like, who would prefer that, like the sort of endless shamble in search of drugs, to actually just having nothing to do.
Well, I think that's the greatest thing about New York. I mean, when I come into work, I come in an hour early just so I can walk, because every block is endless things to look at, and like, just different stuff, different kinds of people, different everything. You know, no matter how much New York changed, like, it's still like infinite possibility on every street, which is great for my brain.
Yeah.
You know, that's what my brain craves. You know, it's like, you know, a million, I mean, it's like, I get the same kind of feeling if I look out on the ocean, though. Just the million different ways the water goes, or you can get it in the woods. You know, it's about like kind of attuning yourself to it. But yeah, the boredom for me, like, I don't do well with boredom. You know, boredom for me is death. You know, which is really why I do Dopey for more than any other reason. It's because I love the action, and I love that I need to keep doing it. You know?
Yeah. I totally. It's interesting. I mentioned in an email earlier that my using stories are so dull because, like for an Appalachian, or in my case, like just Southern addicts, a lot of us just get started because we know, a girl named Darlene or Tammy who's got the key to Mama's medicine cabinet, and so it's just a lot of showing up in living rooms when all the adults are at work and waiting for someone to get back from raiding the medicine cabinet with some oxys, or in my case it was mostly Percocet. That was what the sort of common pain drug was back in the day. And working class people, they get prescribed these drugs because they hurt themselves at the factory, or wherever they worked. So there was always a supply of Percocet or Percodan or whatever. So it's boring.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like when my mother died, I wasn't doing heroin and I was off methadone and everything, but she had leukemia, so she was in a lot of pain, and they gave her Percocet. And after she died, I remember me and my sister came back to the apartment, and I had this kind of stroke of genius. I was like, I bet she has pills someplace in this house.
Oh boy.
And I looked into a bag and I found a bottle of Percocet, and I took it. And I remember how happy I was because I hadn't done opiates for months. Yeah. And I remember how happy I was to find it. And then I was also a little nervous about like my sister figuring out that I took them. Mm-hmm. And I heard, and then my sister was like, "Oh yeah, I just found Mom's pills, and I found the bottle of Percocet, so I'm glad you didn't." Which told me she had a couple of bottles of Percocet. Which on one hand I was upset, but on the other hand I was very relieved that I got away with it. You know what I mean? And like for me, that's a Dopey story.
Yeah.
It's like I think all a Dopey story is like a joy in telling it. You know what I mean? Like, like for me, like that you didn't get busted, or that you did, or that there's something about it. It's just like if you like telling stories and you get high, you can find some details that make a story worth telling, I think. I mean, Chris had the fucking craziest stories, so it wasn't really like that for him. Right. His stories were just like insane. But my stories are mostly just like normal stories that I just thought were funny somehow.
Yeah. You're describing a situation that happened at the death of my grandmother from the other side of the table from me. I was in your sister's position, and I'm not going to violate the anonymity of my family member who, man, we put my grandma in the ground, and he slid into her medicine cabinet like Pete Rose into a tight play at third base, and was so wasted when I was driving him back from North Carolina that I was able to go through his luggage while at a rest stop and find, like, there was this thing that you could do if you had Medicaid a few years ago. It probably stopped it now, where you could get like 400 pills. Like they would send you this enormous box. Like you'd send them your Medicaid account number, and they would send you all your prescription meds for like 60 days or something crazy like that. And so she had, she had a doctor who was like trying to prescribe her out of all stress. Like, oh, well, this pill makes you anxious, so we're going to give you this pill to slow you down. Right. But if you need to be awake during the day, you can take this pill. And so there was like Ativan and hydrocodone and like Vicodin, and like it was basically it would have been enough to make mortgage payments for a long time if someone had decided to flip that box to the market. But but I found all the pills and I took them away, and then I told that family member that he could go to treatment or to meetings the next day or take the ass beating of a lifetime. And oddly, it seems to have worked, which I didn't. So what actually, like, what was your moment of like, it's time to finally kick that got you to like?
There were endless, like, obviously any opiate addict will tell you there are endless moments to kick, like you said. You know what I mean? Like, you're kicking more than you're getting high or thereabouts. Even if you have the best connection and money, you're just always kicking. But and I wanted my life to get better infinite times. I just really preferred getting high for the first half of my using. It was, my mother died, I wanted to change my life, but I still didn't want to stop getting high.
Yeah.
Then right after my mother died, I met this woman that I had met years before, and she was very beautiful, and I always was like wondered what had happened to her. And we started dating, and she got pregnant like right away. Like within like 4 months or something, she was pregnant. And it was like, and I was like, maybe we shouldn't have the baby, you know? And she was like, no. She was 35 or 33 or something like that. And she was like, no, we're having the baby. She was like, you don't have to have anything to do with it if you don't want to. And I was like, this is a good opportunity to be with this beautiful girl and have a baby, and I'm going to give it a shot. You know what I mean? Is what I said to myself.
Right.
And I was fairly clean, I think, at the time. I think I was just smoking pot. I wasn't doing opiates, at least. There's no fairly clean, but as soon as the pregnancy really kind of took shape, my drug use went bananas. Like my habit went off the charts. And
that sounds like your anxiety at work again. Like,
oh yeah, it was total fear.
There's maybe no more anxiety producing sight for a man than a woman in mid or late pregnancy, because the responsibility that is looming for you is kind of like being that front pin in a bowling alley. Like, you know, here comes the bowling ball, you know?
Totally. But dude, I was not a man, you know what I mean? I was a heroin addict who never took care of himself for a minute. You know what I mean? Like, even when I was earning great money, I wasn't taking care of myself. Like, I did not know what it was to be a man or be responsible or be anything. So the idea of being a father, of being a breadwinner, you know, it was total science fiction. And I definitely regressed to drugs. And she didn't know, you know. But she found out when the baby was very little. The baby wasn't even 6 months old when my partner found out that I was shooting dope. And she called her dad, and her dad said, "You better tell Dave to get the fuck out of the house, or I'll kick the shit out of him." And then her father came, picked her up and the baby up, and took her back to Long Island. I went to my dad's house. I kept getting high, and I kept getting high for about a year until my partner like drew up the paperwork for custody and visitation and this and that. And it was like, you can't see the baby without your father unless you have a year clean on a hair test, was the deal. So I got clean. I went to Narcotics Anonymous, but I wanted to get high still. But I wound up putting 18 months together of sobriety, or at least dryness, not using.
Yeah.
And then, you know, all I wanted to do was get my family back together, and I was obsessed with it, but it wasn't coming back together. Mm-hmm. But I was obsessed with it, and I was clean, but I was miserable, and I started smoking weed again. I started doing pills again and whatever. And me and Linda, my partner, had come very close to reconciling, and she found out I was still doing drugs. And I had gotten my custody back. I had my daughter with me on the weekends, and, you know, but I was still smoking pot, and I was living a kind of almost bucolic stoner lifestyle. Like, I was waiting tables at Katz's. I had money in my pocket. I was paying child support. I was seeing my kid on the weekends. And then Linda found out that I was taking pills occasionally, and she was like, nope. And she took custody away again. And I remember just being in my kitchen. I lived on the Lower East Side, and I was just so unhappy. And like, this is where my life was. I think I was 40, and I was 40, and all I wanted to do was to be able to smoke pot. And I just heard myself, and I was just such a child. I was like, all I want to do is smoke pot. Why can't I do what I want? And it was the first time I heard myself, you know, as this 40-year-old man with this. I had a 5-year-old daughter who I loved more than anything. And I was like, you know what? You got to fucking get a grip. You know, that's what my father would say. You got to get a grip.
Yeah.
And I went to an AA meeting. It was a Thursday, and the guy, and I wasn't prepared to get clean. And the guy was like, it was some kid. He had like 10 years. He was like 29. I was like, what the fuck is this? You know? And he says to me, he says, well, do you want today to be your first day? And all I could think was no, you know? But I went home and I was like, geez, I guess today could be my first day, you know, and I hadn't gotten high that day. And I called one of my best friends and I had him come over and I was like, why don't you take all my weed? And I gave him jars of pot. Like I had this fantasy of having jars of pot with different strains, like labeled on the jar. And I had lived that fantasy. I was like, take it. I was like, I'm done. Take it. And he took it all. And that was my first day. And I started going to a 7:30 a.m. meeting every day in Manhattan. And I did step work, and my life changed and got much better. And that was the end of it.
Junkies in their morning meetings, man. They're I guess maybe that's just because that's like when you have to cop is like at dawn because your body is awake. But I've never.
I've always been a crazy early riser.
Yeah. Huh.
And I remember in California, like if you had to score, I mean, like because I was a crazy early riser, and because I didn't like going downtown in LA after 9. It's very busy and crazy, and it seems like anything can happen. If you go down there before 7, you know, it's nobody's there except the dealers and the junkies. And if you go down there before 6, you're the only one there. I remember I found a way to cop at 5 in the morning from some blind dealer in downtown LA. I was like, this is the fucking life. And I kind of have a similar life now. I go to bed at 9. I get up at like 4:40. I take a 5:40 train into Manhattan, and I like to be up before everybody else. And the same thing with meetings. I go to an 8 a.m. morning meeting in Long Island on the beach. We just stare out on the bay. I like that. But my chemistry is early to rise. I just am like that.
Yeah, that blind Mexican heroin dealer in downtown LA. And I think that if you go back, I think that's episode 11 or 12 of the Dopey Podcast. Not positive, but that story has so much weird voodoo in my mind. Like, how does a blind heroin dealer keep from getting ripped off? You know? But I mean, surely this, like, you know, but that's such a fascinating story. I also love those still quiet hours when no one else is awake, but from the other end. Like many times playing CBGBs or Brownies or Wetlands in New York City. There was a girl that I had a long time on again, off again thing with before I got married long ago. But she and I would wander. I would play and we would just wander Manhattan, and we would find these weird little cafes where every taxi driver in the city, because it was like 4:30 and they weren't looking for fares, would be piled up in there, and we get like pizza or deli or whatever. And
isn't that the best? It's the best.
It's a secret world that it's more common, I think, in New York just because it's a 24-hour city. L.A., for all its pretenses of being a big city, definitely has a schedule. Like everything sort of wraps by 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, and downtown L.A., as you described, in those weird like early morning hours, is spooky in a way that I find really exciting.
It is. It's desperate, though. It's desperate, and it's broken and spooky. It's all those things. I just love when you mention Wetlands. Like, Wetlands was, like, my favorite place. That was the only club that, like, I was happy to be at. Like, I just love that place.
5/8 got our deal off a show at Wetlands with Walter Yetnikoff, you know, of Hitman fame. We played Wetlands with a band called Letters to Cleo, and all of, like, Richard Robinson and Lisa Robinson, who were, if you know anything about New York music history, like they're right there at the Ramones and the Clash and Elvis Costello, and and they were there with Walter, and that's the night we got signed. So Wetlands always kind of holds a special place in my heart. But yeah, that was our scene. So you've been doing Dopey for what, 4 years now?
Yeah, a little less than 4 years, because I just got 4 years clean in August. So like 3.5 years of Dopey. Yeah.
And it's been a hell of a journey. I mean, it's like oxygen to me right now. I'm just binging on it because I feel that a deep emotional connection to this path that you're on. Although I was not ready to find out that Chris and Todd had died. That was really hard. But what is your daily routine? sort of keep yourself sane now is up before dawn. You're hitting an 8 o'clock meeting. Are you doing any kind of therapy?
No. I only do meetings once or twice a week.
Yeah.
I don't do it every day. I do it once or twice a week. I would like to go more, but I don't find the time. I don't do therapy, although I ran into my old therapist on the street the other morning. I walk a lot. I do the show. I work a lot for Katz's. That's pretty much it. That's really it. I talk to a shitload of addicts through Dopey.
Mm-hmm.
I go to a couple meetings a week, and I work my ass off, and I'm with my family. That's my life. I feel like therapy for me is like, if I can make, and this is going to sound stupid, I feel like I can't afford therapy, and I don't mean it like I can pay for it. But for me, I can't really do a real life examination while I'm working so hard. I feel like I need to work a little harder, make a little more money, and kind of like look at it like from a safer vantage. Like, I feel like I'm still in the trenches, more or less, if that makes any sense.
One of the sort of tacit goals of the Crash and Ride podcast is to decommodify mental health care. Like, you shouldn't have to be upper middle class to sit down and talk through shit. But like currently the way health insurance works and the way that mental health care works is you're going to, peel off a couple of bills every time you sit down to talk to a therapist. And that's just insanity. You shouldn't have to be rich to get better. But I understand what you're saying. Like, it's in a weird way, if you're like working class, which you clearly are at this point in your life, like to go sit in an office feels kind of like going to the country club,
Well, also, the way I am, and it's kind of reflected in Dopey, that I'm a big talker, and I love talking to people, and I don't mind divulging shit about myself. So, like, I kind of am an open book with a lot of people. I think a lot of people that don't have the ability to share their lives really need therapy in a way, because it's their only outlet to tell somebody what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm pretty comfortable talking to my friends about what's going on and my fellows and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I'm not saying that replaces therapy. I think I do see in the future, like, wanting to detangle the reality of what happened to me.
Right.
It's just, in the past, it was always, well, why am I an addict? And like, that question doesn't get answered just because you're sitting with a therapist. The hardest thing I ever had to work through therapy was being obsessed with trying to get my family back.
Yeah.
That was my obsession. And the truth is that I got sober 3 months after getting sober. My partner came back to me, and we wound up having another baby. We had been apart for years.
Yeah.
So that's a great gift of recovery. That's like the greatest gift of recovery, was for me to repair my family, which was all I really wanted to do. But I've used therapy as more of like a triage for a terrible obsession, as opposed to like dealing with it for the bigger sort of questions in life. And I feel like I need to be more patient and calm, and not in a place where I'm running from thing to thing, to really benefit from it properly. Or that's the way I look at it, at least.
Yeah. I mean, that seems completely valid to me, that right now you're kind of in working man mode. It's good, solid. I do want to, so I generally wind these interviews up with 10 questions that are loosely based on the Inside the Actor Studio questions that were created by a French radio host named Bernard Pivot. But before I jump into that, I want to ask you, I know you've got the smoothie obsession, and you got your spot, but there's a place on the Lower West Side, just like 2 or 3 blocks from those parks that they made on the old piers on the west side. It's an Israeli-run place that has like falafel and fries, but they do a smoothie that's like a banana, date, and almond smoothie. While we were talking, I kind of was trying to find it on my phone, and I can't find it. But I'm gonna send you that, because that place, it was probably the best smoothie of my life. And when I got back from that trip to New York, I started making them at home, and I got hooked on them. But I'm gonna.
What's in it?
It's bananas, dates, almonds. I don't think they add any sugar because the bananas are so sweet, you know.
I have a real fucking thing with this. You know, I had a smoothie this morning. I like know the guys by name. Like, I pretend they're my friends. And like I was Googling on the ride in this morning, is peanut butter every day bad for you? And like, I'm kind of getting nervous about it. And I walked in and I was like, the dude is a Mexican guy. He's one of the only Mexicans I've ever met in New York.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what do you think, man? I was like, maybe his name is Fernando. And like, Fernando doesn't like me, you know, and I see him every day. And I pretend like he's my friend. And I'm like, Fernando, what do you think, man? He was like, I think it's very healthy. And I was like, all right. So what I did this morning is I had almond milk, peanut butter, banana, and I had Fernando add rolled oats and chia seeds. That was my smoothie this morning.
So you get double peanut butter, right? I remember this from a recent podcast, like double peanut butter.
Yeah, it's very well. It just happened that way. I once said to Fernando, "Make it very peanut buttery, please." And then he started doubling up the peanut butter, but they didn't tell me. It was very embarrassing. It was the episode that Aurora was on recently, and me and her went to get a smoothie.
Yeah.
And the manager was like, "Oh, he likes double peanut butter," and Aurora was just mocking me for a week. After that.
I really enjoyed that episode. So, what is double though? Like, how much is a normal dose of peanut butter, and what is double?
I think it's 2 tablespoons.
2 tablespoons is a perfectly normal, like, serving of, even on keto, like. 2 tablespoons is normal amount of peanut butter. That's not crazy. That's as much as you put on a sandwich, right? Now you're doing it without the bread.
It's like, thank you. I appreciate that, but like, it's really haunting me right now. Well, because DopeyCon is coming up. That's the other thing, Patrick. DopeyCon is coming up on October 12th, and I don't want to be fat for DopeyCon, and I don't want the peanut butter to be fucking me up. And it's like, so like, you know, I got to get fit, and I'm fucking stuck on this double peanut butter shit, and I'm too afraid to tell Fernando to not double. I won't make it or something.
New Yorkers don't get fat though. You walk everywhere.
Well, some do. I mean, you're right, but you know, a neurotic person. You know what I mean? I don't want people to come to DopeyCon, have never seen me, and be like, "Wow, Dave's a lot fatter than I thought he'd be."
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Well, by contrast, you're not shooting dope.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's funny. I think all this shit is funny. You know what I mean? I'm not really worried about it. I'm in decent shape. Yeah. I just think it's funny.
No, I mean, you just handed like every like jackass in your life a handle they can swing you around by, though. You know, like when they see you, they're gonna be like, "God, what have you been eating, man? You're huge."
I know, but that's just that's the name of the game, right? I mean, I just think, and the people who take the bait on that shit, Patrick, they're not your friends. The people that want to make you feel bad, they're just not your friends. The people that want to make you feel like, Dave, you look good. The peanut butter isn't fucking you up too bad.
Yeah, those people they're not your friends. They're just called your bandmates.
Exactly. Well, that's why I don't play in a band anymore.
Yeah.
I can't handle the abuse.
Yeah. No, I'm in a band with a bunch of sober guys. So we love and take care of each other. It's good.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's the band I've been in.
Yeah, I would one day I would love to be in a band again. I don't know what it would take. I'm going to play some music at DopeyCon, but I think I'm going to do it by myself.
Yeah. Well, then you can hate everybody in the band.
Or really be very kind and loving to everybody in the band.
I think that's two sides of the same coin,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I hear you. I wish you could come to DopeyCon. That would be super cool.
Hey, I know you got a hard stop coming up, so let's jump into these questions really quick, if you don't mind.
Well, it's not as hard as you think, but totally, let's do it.
So the first question is, what is the fondest memory you have of a meal that you've had?
Finest memory I've had of a meal that I've had. Well, I'll just go with the other night. We had a bunch of food in the house, and I like to cook, and I browned some garlic and onions and peppers, and I cut up some sausage, and I made this delicious sort of pasta dish for my family, and we all liked it, and it was great.
Yeah, man. This question...
Simple. A lot of Italian spices, but it was just simple and good.
This question seems to divide my sort of interview subjects into two camps. There's people who are like, yeah, we went to Le Cirque, or there was this restaurant we went to in Paris, and we spent half a mortgage payment on dinner, and it was extraordinary. And then there's people who were like, I rode a motorcycle all day and we camped in the woods and I ate a steak with a pocket knife. And that seems to be like,
right.
you know,
Right.
For some people it's about fancy, and for some people it's about experience. And it sounds like you're definitely one of the more like, this was more about my family and the simplicity and the perfection of just being together. And
the joy of actually turning the raw ingredients into this delicious, nourishing food for my family. Like, I listen to music when I cook. It totally relaxes me. Like, I love that. And I loved, my mother was an amazing cook. And I loved eating her food in her house with my family growing up. Like, I have great memories of that.
What did she make, your mom?
She made like real homey, hearty, comforty kind of food. Like, she would make like a meat sauce. Like, I guess you'd call it a bolognese sauce, but you wouldn't because we were middle-class Jews. She would just make this delicious meat sauce. That was a regular. She made this dish called potted chicken, which was like this chicken that was, you know, baked in a pot with all these, you know, vegetables and this rich sauce. It was delicious. She would make this yellow rice that she would make with chicken broth. It was, I don't know. My mom was a great cook, and all the food was delicious, and she spent a ton of time in the kitchen, and we ate as a family, and I loved that.
Yeah. Second question, and you can answer this one of two ways. The question originally was, what is the most frightened you've ever been? But I discovered, especially with some of the women who've come to talk to me, that can be a really hard question because terrible things often happen to women in the world. So the optional other question you can answer is, tell me about a time you were braver than you ever thought you could be.
Oh, Jesus. I guess I don't even know how to answer that question. But I think maybe the most scared I ever was, the most scared I ever was when my partner found the needle in my lap and found out I was shooting up and I was going to lose my family. And that feeling of leaving that apartment in Queens and going home to my dad's house was like every fear you could ever have rolled up into a night. And then every day after that was kind of the echo of that fear.
How did that transpire? You were shooting up in the house? Were you in the bathroom or something?
Yeah. No. She went to bed early all the time. You know, the baby was a couple months, and Linda was a creature of habit, and she would fall asleep watching TV on the couch. And I was in the back of the apartment. I had a little office, and she was watching The Bachelorette, eating ice cream. And I figured she was done, you know. And I had gotten into shooting up again, and I was shooting up in the office. I think I was watching a Beverly Hills 90210 rerun, and I was lying on the couch, and I had a different couch, and I had the needle in my lap, and Linda came to say goodnight, and she couldn't see the needle in the spoon, but I thought she could. And I said, "Oh, you found me," or something, you know, something stupid. But that's how it had happened. But it was like terrifying, just total. It was like the jig was up kind of thing, you know.
God, it must have been terrifying for her too.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it was much more terrifying for her. But for me, it was every sort of like, you failed the test feeling. Yeah. Plus, you've disappointed everybody. Plus, you're not a good person. You know, it's like, it was bad. Very scary.
Yeah. What is the thing that you've lost in your life that you regret losing the most?
Jesus. I guess I kind of got it back, but my ability to make choices, you know what I mean? To be myself. You know, recovery gave it back to me, but that was the thing. What have I lost that I haven't gotten back that I regret the most? Well, let's say the apartment on 24th Street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend.
Everything else I got back.
Yeah. I have a friend who's got the ultimate rent control story in New York, and when I tell people, they're just like, I love that guy has that, but I want to murder him. But he got married really young, moved in with a girl and her mom. Her mom had this apartment since the 80s in Greenpoint, and it's this enormous place. And then he got divorced, and mom and ex-wife moved upstate, and he still has that place, and it's like $500 a month, and it's literally 3,000 square feet. It's the top floor. It's the classic, like it's the New York apartment that you saw in movies in the 70s and 80s. You know, like
Right.
all exposed brick and everything sort of like improvised. Like there's a kitchen, but it's this amazing. I mean, every time I go there, I think I would love to have this life, but you know, the landlord won't fix anything. Like it's just like he has to do everything.
Right.
But,
Well, that's what you have to pay for.
yeah.
You know, you don't pay rent, you got to pay that.
Yeah.
And I also hate having lost my career in TV. You know, that's something I hate. I wish I had lost.
I mean,
whatever.
You're building a new media thing though, and this might end up. Yeah. Things are. You've got a great podcast.
You never know.
Man. Tell me a time you received an act of kindness from a stranger.
Act of kindness from a stranger. When I was at the 7:30 morning meeting, first day there, this amazing man, painter from New Zealand. I never said two words to him. At the end of the meeting, he said, "I hope to see you here again tomorrow." And when he said that to me, it changed my life in a way I can't even explain. Like I had never felt welcome in these places. And just him, he was so cool. And him saying it to me, it was just the biggest gift anyone could ever give me. Because I went back every day after that. And it saved my life.
Are you still friends with him?
No. He got very sick. I think he's in his 90s.
Oh,
and
wow.
when I moved to Long Island, I stopped going to the 7:30 meting.
Yeah.
I saw him at Katz's, and I gave him a free meal when I saw him. He was a brilliant, beautiful man. I think he's still alive, but he's very old and sick.
Yeah.
And I never had his number. I never became close with him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just he was kind to me. You know, he was the kind of person that you didn't want to invade them because he was like a celebrity, and I didn't want to like push myself onto him. And he wasn't like, I asked him to sponsor me. He was like, I don't sponsor anybody who has less than 5 years.
Wow.
So I was like, I gave him his berth. You know what I mean? His space.
Yeah. This is a question that often, it's sort of centered on like people who are gigging a lot or who have gigged a lot. And I know it seems like that's just something that's kind of now coming back into your life. But the question is, what is your favorite place to gig?
I love playing at Wetlands.
Yeah.
I love playing, I got to play at Tramps and SOBs, and now I don't play anywhere. I love playing Sidewalk Cafe. My favorite place to gig now is at either my house in Long Island or at my dad's apartment.
Yeah.
That's where I record the show.
I love playing for my kid, man. I have a couple silly songs I wrote just for her. I'm a terrible guitar player, but she doesn't care. Makes her happy. She dances. It's awesome.
Yeah, I had a little moment with my young daughter where she had one of these jumper bouncer things.
Yeah.
And I would sing to her, and she loved it. And now that she can walk, she walks away from me when I play. So it's not the same. It's not the same thing.
New Yorkers, man.
But yeah, at home.
They've seen it all.
Yeah. We'll call it at home.
Income and visa considerations aside, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
I live in Manhattan.
Yeah. Everybody who lives in New York seems to have that answer. Like, why would you live anywhere else? Everything's here.
I just love Manhattan. I love Manhattan. I don't mind living where I live, but I love Manhattan. I can't even answer that. It's like I have such a love affair with this city. Like I just live for it. I try to walk 10 miles a day here, just to clear my head. You know, it's my thing.
If you're walking 10 miles, dude, an extra tablespoon of peanut butter isn't gonna fucking make a difference.
Right on. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah. Do you have a perfect musical instrument, like an ideal one? And if so, do you already own it?
No, I don't. I have shitty acoustic guitars. I guess the closest thing to a perfect instrument that I have is marine band harmonicas.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, the diatonic marine band harmonicas. I love them.
Yeah.
They're great. They play great.
When you play guitar, do you have the sort of Neil Young, like, harmonica collar so you can sing and play harmonica?
I have one, but I never use it.
Yeah.
When I play harmonica, I like to play kind of blues style. Like, I liked like Big Walter Horton and Sonny Terry and those guys. But
Yeah,
I mean, I don't obviously play like those guys, but I was never like a Neil Young, Bob Dylan harmonica player. But I always wanted to. It just never happened for me that way.
Do you have a bullet mic? You have one of those like Shure green bullets?
I did. I did. I don't anymore.
And those things are great. Is there a musical instrument that you've sold, lost, or had stolen that you wish, like anything, you could get back?
Yeah, I had a Fender Rhodes electric piano that I loved, and first it fell to shit, because I was on heroin. But then I sold it for like $1,000. And it was, I bought it for $300 though. It was one of the best deals I ever got. Yeah. But I missed that one. Yeah. I love that. Oh, and I have another perfect instrument. I bought an upright piano, and I get it tuned every 6 months, and I love it. It's great.
Oh, that's nice. That's in your place in Long Island?
Yeah, it's great. I don't get to play nearly as much as I'd like, but I love it.
Yeah. So this question is a little bit silly, but I like it. This is the newest question. I was riding home from a gig. I guess it's been a month now, and it was super late because we had to go to the emergency room after the gig, and that's a whole other story. But we were driving home from Charlotte, North Carolina, and there was this crazy blue light in the sky, and I was driving, and Dan Horowitz, the bass player from 5/8, was in the passenger seat, and like I looked up, and I was like, I don't even know what the fuck is that, and it was a little freaky, and I'm not a UFO guy. I'm not one of these guys who believes, but there was a moment where I was like, holy shit, I think I'm about to see a UFO. And I said to Dan, like, what do you think that is? He's like, I don't know. That's weird. That's weird blue light. And then, of course, it turned out to be a cell phone tower. But it made me realize that if I was gonna see UFO, I want to see it with Dan because he's kind of seen everything. He grew up in the city and upstate, and he's funny.
Dan's a New Yorker. Was that your New York accent?
Yeah.
That was good. I like that.
Yeah, Dan. Everybody in 5/8 but me is from an urban area. Like Dan and Mike are both born in Brooklyn, I think, and then Dan grew up and got old. Once his parents moved upstate, when his dad got a job teaching anthropology at SUNY Binghamton. I was waiting for you to tell me that you'd taken Dan's father's class because your first pothead buddy you were in that cultural anthropology class. But you were
that was purchased. I wish, yeah.
But Mike grew up on Long Island.
That was Ithaca, yeah.
Mike grew up on Long Island. And Sean Dunn, the guitar player, he's from New Orleans. So I'm the only like country boy in the band. But the question is, if you were riding in a car and you saw a UFO, who would you want to be in the passenger seat?
I would want to be in the passenger seat, and I would want Linda to drive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
can you hear me?
Yeah. I was thinking about that.
Good.
Yeah. Well, we've only got one more question, and that is, if you can imagine a taxi that could go anywhere in time, or space, and you got in this taxi and you said to the driver, "Hey, man, take me home." Where is home?
That's a tough question, right?
Yeah.
That's a crazy question, That is a crazy question. I think home is the biggest home for me is where I am now.
Yeah.
With my kids and my partner, sort of wife, that's home. But I'm also like quick to think, the early 80s in Manhattan, in Chelsea. But it's those two places. I think if I could jump into a taxi right now, I would go to 85 or 84 in Chelsea to see my mom and my dad and me and my sister, because it's something I can't see now. Like at the end of the day, I'm going to go home and be home.
Yeah.
If I could go anywhere, it would be to witness my family, at its highest form of functionality.
Right.
My nuclear family growing up. I would love to see that.
Yeah.
I'd love to see my mother. I haven't seen my mom in 10 years, or 11 years now, and I was so fucked up for the 20 years before that. So I haven't seen my mom in a long time, really. So I would love to do that.
Yeah, man. It's My answer to that question is around, like, my grandparents were sort of my rock, and their place in the country in North Carolina was a stable, safe place. And so, yeah, I get it.
I know what you mean. I would love to go back to see my grandparents. I remember when I was a little kid, my grandma and grandpa had an apartment in Queens, and they had 3 sons, and my great-grandfather lived, like, right there. So, like, it was like a Jewish kind of poor version of The Godfather, where there were, like, just a lot of men and family in old New York. I would love to see that. But I think seeing my family in the 80s would be just what I'd like to see the most. But yeah. I know what you mean. Any place where you feel safe and loved, and it's just something you don't get to see anymore, right? What you used to see.
Well, I think if there's anything that drives me, like, the thing that I'm angriest at Fox News and the whole, like, rise of this intolerant right thing is that it's ruined family gatherings in the South. Like, all those men gathered now have been drinking from this poison fountain about, like, who's, quote, ruining the country, unquote, and all that. And, you know, I learned a lot from those guys back before they got radicalized, you know.
Right.
I learned about, you know, how to keep a house, and you know, I learned a lot of, like, I mean, just things about how to move through the woods and how to just be part of a family. And now when all those guys get together, they've all got just the fucking garbage that comes out of their mouths is shocking. And
yeah, I know what you mean. I think it'll change. You know, I think this is it's a period we're in, and I hope it changes. You know, I'm so apolitical because I just hate. I don't feel like it connects people. I feel like it pushes people apart.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I think that you're dead on with that. Well, man, this has been great. I really, really, really enjoyed this conversation. I'm really glad you were able to do it.
Oh, thank you so much, Patrick. I did too. I hope I handled your questions okay, and
flawlessly.
I hope I didn't go down any path that I shouldn't have taken.
Nah.
But I really do appreciate being on the show, and I'd love to have you on Dopey sometime if you'd like to come on and tell some stupid stories with Mima and
Mima's medicine cabinet.
Thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will. Oh man, I just remembered an insane story that I had forgotten. That involved me trying to get home on my bike, just fucking loaded, from someone's house because Mima came home. I'll save that story for Dopey.
Sounds good. Any Mima story is a worthy story for Dopey.
Yeah.
We don't get enough Mima on Dopey at all.
Yeah. I was just such a young, like, fucking drug user. I got started so early. I started smoking pot when I was 11. So.
Yeah.
But man, I'll be in New York before you know it. I'm sure there's some gig that will bring me there. And I'll try to get over to Chelsea and we can sit in the same room. I'd like that even more.
Oh yeah, that would be killer. That's the way to do it.
Yeah. Oh man, have a great day. Thank you so much.
You too, Patrick. Thank you, man. Thank you so much. If I could ever do anything, let me know. I'm happy to do anything I can.
You're fucking right on. Thank you. Same to you.
Thanks. All right. Thanks, Patrick. Have a good one, man.
You too. Bye. Man, that was a great talk. Super proud of this episode. Really, really like Dave a lot, and I really enjoyed that conversation. And we talked over Skype. You know, it was early in the morning. I called his cell phone from my Skype account and recorded it. And once again, as seems to happen often with Skype, there's a little, like, dropout there about 2/3 of the way through the podcast. And I guess that's just what happens when you're living on rural broadband like I am. You know, in the interview I said I'm not going to be at DopeyCon, but DopeyCon's only $10. It's in New York. I think I'm going to try to go. I'm going to surprise Dave and show up. It's only $10. If you want to buy a T-shirt, that would probably help pay for me to get there. So, yeah, watch for T-shirts. They'll be here soon. I'll have a pre-order up in the next few days. It's funny, there's been a lot of episodes lately where I talk to former IV drug users. Next week, everything goes according to plan. I'm just talking to a guy who got absolutely disillusioned after selling a platinum record and punched the eject button, which you'll think will be really interesting. So stay tuned for that. I'm also lining up some episodes I have kind of held back, dealing specifically with PTSD. I'm hoping maybe December is going to be PTSD month on Crash and Ride, and I'm going to do 4 straight episodes just on PTSD because it's a thing I don't fully understand, but so many of my friends suffer from it. So stay tuned for that. Remember, as always, if you're struggling with thoughts of self-harm, if you need to talk to somebody about your anxiety and depression, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. If you're a trans person struggling with anxiety, depression, and gender dysphoria, and you want to talk to a peer, call the Trans Lifeline's peer support line at 1-877-565-8860 or go to translifeline.org. Thanks, as always, to my buddy Jake Kreger. He was the first ever guest on Crash and Ride and has provided me with show notes and ideas to make the show better. He's essentially acting as a de facto producer, so I guess if I had to say, our producer is Jake Kreger. Thank you, Jake. Thanks to Gene Woolfolk and my brothers in the Powder Room. Powder Room provides all of the music you hear on Crash and Ride. The intro, the bumper, the outro are all from their first album, Curtains, which you can find on Bandcamp. Just Google the Powder Room, Athens, Georgia, Bandcamp, and you'll find the album Curtains. I would highly encourage you to buy that record. It's amazing. I did actually play for the Powder Room for a while. I was the one who was playing drums when the van caught on fire. You can see pictures of the van burning on the cover of the album Lucky, which is the album that I played on, by the Powder Room, also at their Bandcamp page. If you don't live in Athens, it may have escaped your notice that Athens, Georgia placed like #1 on some independent organizations like list of great cities in which to be a musician in America. I heartily endorse this finding. If you're playing music and you're living somewhere like Anaheim or Los Angeles or Brooklyn or Nashville and you're like, I can't afford to live here anymore, there's plenty of cheap places to live in Athens, Georgia, and there's 8 million musicians here. There's a bunch of great studios. Go with what the media says on this one. You should move to Athens. Thanks again to Greer Amplification and Jittery Joe's for sponsoring the show. Thank you for listening. Remember, until we talk again, take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Ask for help if you need it. Go see live music. Support your favorite band. And remember, loud guitars save lives.